First full squad workouts are just a week away. So before we get there, who do we think is going to surprise us in camp this year? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners, if you want to know a little bit more about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work over at 810 WHB, doing lots of stuff over there. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And beginning today, we are now back to our 5-episode-a-week limit, where we are just coming off of 3 episodes a week. So more Royals content coming your way. We're going to be down in Surprise coming up this weekend. We'll be there till Tuesday. So we'll have plenty of video. We'll have plenty of interviews. Follow along on my Twitter handle again at JohnnyJ_15, JOHNYJ_15. And you won't be able to miss anything because we've got lots of stuff that is going to be coming your way. And hopefully, a lot of your questions are going to be answered about some of these guys, how some of them look, which guys are mixing in with the starters, which guys are surprising us. And that's what we're going to lead off with tonight's show. Going into camp, are there a few guys out there that are going to surprise, at least my picks? And I think going into this week, there will be a couple of prediction episodes. We'll call them that. Maybe for the regular season, maybe for the team as a whole. But to open up this week, feels like it's a pretty good time to give some of my surprise candidates before we actually head out there to surprise. Let's all keep in mind, too, that this is not going to be an indicator about how good they're going to be in the regular season, because oftentimes we get thrown off by how these guys look in spring training. Sometimes your best performer in spring training doesn't even make the roster, or is one of your worst offensive players or one of your worst pitchers come the regular season, because spring training is just some glorified scrimmaging and some glorified practices, but it's still baseball, and it gets our blood flowing and it excites us for the regular season. But before we do dive into some of our surprise candidates, I want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on FanDuel, which is America's #1 sports book. And if you bet those first $5, you can win $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So download FanDuel and join today to go and get started. My 3 candidates before we head down to surprise, I think that they are maybe some obvious ones mixed in there. I might give an honorable mention before we wrap up this segment, but the first one I have is Kris Bubic. Kris Bubic is maybe not a surprise candidate because he was so successful in the reliever role, but the reason I picked Kris Bubic is this shift to the rotation is going to surprise a lot of people. There's little belief that I have in Alec Marsh or Kyle Wright beating him out in camp, because I think he's going to be one of those top guys. He should take this role and run with it, for lack of a better term there. Kris Bubic has the stuff to be a top 3 guy in the rotation. For this year, he'll be penciled in as the number 4, number 5 guy right next to Michael Lorenzen. The spin rate he has, the changeup he works with, the slider that he developed with Brian Sweeney, all those things combined make him a breakout candidate. And the reason I'm so confident in that is I think that the stuff he showcased in the bullpen is going to be able to translate to the rotation. The inning workload is going to be different. You're not going into the regular season saying Kris Bubic is going to be a 180-inning guy like Brady Singer was. But he can give you really solid 140 innings of work. Or you can get him to maybe 150 if he's a lot more stretched out than we all believe him to be. But 140 to 150, those are 2 totals you can live with. And the strikeout totals are going to be there, in my opinion. I don't believe there's going to be this tough transition where the velo isn't there anymore. The hitters aren't biting at his secondary offering or his changeup, his slider, his fastball won't have the spin. I don't believe that's going to be the case. This transition to the number 5 spot gives the rotation another arm that can take them to the next level. You have your top 3 in Reagans, Lugo, and Waka. You have Lorenzen there. Chris Bubich can make this rotation go from a top 5 one in the American League to maybe a top 2, if not the best rotation next to Seattle in the American League. A lot of it's going to come down to how they build off of last year, if they can recreate a lot of what they did last year. But there's a big reason why the front office is so confident that a guy who was dominant, really pretty dominant in the 8th inning, is going to be better off in the rotation. If they weren't confident that was going to happen, they never would have made that switch, or at least talked about that switch. I believe that going into camp, he's got that job, and barring an absolute collapse, which I don't believe is going to happen, he's going to be your 5th starter. And I think a 5th starter that's going to go kind of more league-wide this year. People know about Chris Bubich, but he feels like one of those guys that mid-season, when we're talking about some of the guys in the rotation, he'll get more national recognition for being so good out of the bullpen and then backing it up again in the rotation. I know that there are people out there that go, he wasn't that good as a starter. I think in 2023, the beginning of the year, right before he had Tommy John, you were seeing those glimpses of what he could be. Then he just got hurt. When he comes back from Tommy John, he looks great. He looks better than he did when he was starting in 2023. But I feel like there's this ability to take what he's got and really flourish into the rotation. If it doesn't work out, you've got that fallback that he can pitch in the 8th inning, and you don't have to worry about him transitioning back. That should be able to be pretty seamless for him. So I think he goes into surprise, he takes that job, and he runs with it. The second guy on my list here is Carlos Hernandez. And as I mentioned before we open up this segment, some will be surprises. Maybe Chris Bubich to you isn't really a surprise because he was so good last year. Carlos Hernandez would be a surprise. He's out of options. I actually read Annie Rogers' article this morning, and in her roster projection, she had Chris Stratton over Carlos Hernandez. Since he's out of options, though, maybe he does get the nod over Chris Stratton. Chris Stratton's under contract. Who knows what the Royals are thinking before camp on what he could provide this team. You have a triple-digit fastball, though. And a triple-digit fastball can go a long ways at the big league level. And for years with Hernandez, he had that power. He, I think, average-wise, has the most powerful fastball in the bullpen. Not opponent's average-wise, not spin rate, just pure velocity. He has the most powerful fastball in the bullpen, more so than Harvey, more so than Estevez, more so than Ursig. Ursig might have him by a notch or two. It's very close, though. Hernandez showcased in September and late August, for that matter, that there was something still there. That setup role we saw him in 2023, that version of him that a lot of people wanted to be the closer once they traded Scott Barlow, was still in there. He's got to come into camp and show that he's that guy, but now he's got that extra pressure of, if I don't pitch well enough, I could be traded away, I could be DFA'd, and at that point, I'm scratching and clawing to get back to the big league level. But something about what he did in August and September gives me reason to believe there is a big league arm that can get big timeouts in 2025. Not just somebody that comes in when it's a blowout in the 5th or the 6th inning and he throws it 101, 102, and you feel great about it, but he's not pitching any high leverage innings. That, to me, is going to change this year. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm going to go out there on a limb and say Carlos Hernandez, pitching for his job at this point, is going to have a pretty good spring. That's the initial feeling that I have, the gut feeling that I have. Those are two pitchers. And I'm also pretty high on Steven Cruz, but with the player options that Carlos Hernandez has and Steven Cruz having a couple of them, it's just not going to surprise me. Even if Cruz pitches better in camp, that Hernandez gets the nod over him. But if he's fine-tuned that stuff in the offseason, where there is more than just a straight fastball, because that fastball has been hittable in his career, very hittable. Big league guys can square up 100 and 101 if you're not locating it properly. There's this sense in my mind that Hernandez has upped his game a little bit in the offseason, and we're going to see it down in Surprise. I'll get, an up-close look at him coming up on Monday or Tuesday of next week, hopefully, if he's throwing some live BP or something like that. Those are the two pitchers that I have that are going to surprise some people. Honorable mention might be a James MacArthur, really just because I think the bad luck he ran into last season derailed the last half of his season. In a limited role, a sixth inning role, a seventh inning role, he's going to be a little bit better, in my opinion. Maybe not, but that's what my gut's telling me. The same way I just said that with Carlos Hernandez, James MacArthur with the pure stuff could have a pretty good camp. It does not mean he's going to make the team out of spring training. In fact, right now in my roster projection, I don't have James MacArthur pitching out of the bullpen in Kansas City. I have him in Omaha to start the year. Doesn't mean he can't surprise some people in spring training. But the last one I'm going to go with here is on the offensive side of things. And yes, MJ Melendez could be an honorable mention. We're going to talk about his stance in the third segment today. To me, this is going to be more so about Michael Massey. Michael Massey's my pick to surprise a lot of people. I think he's going to get some run out there in left field. That should be pretty interesting to see alongside of where Jonathan India might move around to. But from the plate, offensively, he has that look, he has that feel of this is going to be a pretty big spring training for him. The Royals go out there, they bring in Jonathan India, a guy that only plays his position. He's being asked to move around. Part of this surprise is there's this belief that I have he plays well in left field. He looks comfortable in left field, and that translates to the plate because of the confidence that he would exude from that. It's tough to make that transition out to the outfield, especially when you've only played second base. But Michael Massey's my breakout candidate for 2025. Have this sense that it's going to begin in spring training, where he's going to pop up on that radar of he's taking some of that success in the postseason, taking it into the offseason, takes it into Surprise, and takes it into the regular season. So if there's one guy in this lineup that is destined, in my opinion, to have a pretty big breakout, I have him on my list. There is part of me that wants to disregard that, because even if Michael Massey hits really well in spring training, looks good, it does not mean it's going to translate well. But as I'm sticking my neck out here with these three guys, there's obviously that belief that I think this is going to go a little bit further than just spring training success. This carries into the regular season. Pitchers, easier to do than guys at the plate. Sometimes you go into spring training and hit 400, and then after the first month of the season, you're hitting $150. That could happen. I just don't see it happening with guys like Michael Massey, guys like Chris Bubich, and Carlos Hernandez. Those are my three picks for breakout candidates in Surprise, Arizona. If you've got anybody that's on your radar, let us know in the YouTube comments below. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, how does this roster stack up against other teams in the American League Central? Got this great question on Twitter. I'll be sure to give a shout out here when we open up the next segment. But how do they fare against the rest of the teams in the AL Central? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into the same game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I believe there's a huge game coming up on Saturday in the SEC, Auburn, Alabama. Man, Alabama's won me some money. I'm going to continue to go with them in college basketball. Crimson Tide, the number 1 team in the country. Auburn coming off a loss to Florida, but give me the Crimson Tide in that game. This should be something that a lot of fans are contemplating going into spring training because the offseason is wrapping up at this point. I'm still holding out hope that one more bat is brought in before everybody reports to camp, which is next Monday. They've got some time even after pitchers and catchers report on Wednesday. But there are names out there. There's not many left, and you could always make a trade in spring training. But I got this question last night. I believe it was last night right before the Super Bowl started, and it's from Sports on Twitter, comparing the roster to other teams in the American League Central. Because to that point, fans out there, listeners, followers, whatever you want to call yourself, you are wondering how the Royals can improve off of last year, an 86-win season, finding a way to win the division and this go-round, get further than the ALDS. The Twins have not done much this offseason. Cleveland has subtracted. The White Sox have added a lot of guys on one-year deals. It's still a lot of the same guys from a 121-loss team from last year, though. And you do feel like this is going to be a team that, come the trade deadline, move somebody like Luis Robert, move any notable piece in that lineup and a lot of the one-year deal guys they just brought in to get some sort of value for their minor league system. The Tigers are that wild card to me because Alex Bregman's still out there. And since Alex Bregman is still out there, this can change everything in the Central. I think the Tigers and the Royals are nearly identical in a lot of ways. The Royals upgraded their bullpen a little bit, still give the edge to Detroit lineup-wise. It's pretty top-heavy in rotation. You have Skubal. Royals have Reagans. They have Jack Flaherty. Royals have Seth Lugo. Michael Wacha's in there. Alex Cobb for Detroit. There's Casey Mize, Reese Olson. The Royals rounded that with Lorenzen and likely Chris Bubich. The Tigers and Royals need a lot of the same things to go correct this year. They need some guys at the bottom of their order to be a league average player. They need one guy in that lineup to play at an MVP level. For the Royals, obvious answer, Bobby Witt Jr. For the Tigers, probably Riley Green, unless Alex Bregman comes into the conversation. Riley Green, though, is that dark horse candidate for an MVP award, I believe, every single season. He's got the talent. He's got the ability to carry that offense, but there's still guys in that lineup that are incredibly dangerous. Parker Meadows, you have Kerry Carpenter. You could add a couple more pieces to that lineup in the middle part of it, including the name like Alex Bregman, and see where that lineup takes you. But their rotation and their bullpen are going to do the majority of the heavy lifting. For the Royals, you could say the exact same thing. The lineup does have legitimate threats, but it's going to be the rotation and it's going to be the bullpen that carries this group. If they are to win the division, if Detroit is able to win the division, that's what's going to be carrying them. For Minnesota, it all depends on health. Always is going to circle back to health. Can Correa stay healthy? Can Buxton stay healthy? Can Royce Lewis stay healthy? Can Pablo Lopez bounce back? Can Joe Ryan continue to dominate everybody in the way that he dominates the Royals? Can that bullpen stay healthy? You have Griffin Jackson, Johan Duran, and the back end of the bullpen. What are they going to getting out of a Harrison Bader in the outfield? Seemed to work out for them for the most part when they brought in Michael A. Taylor, a defensive first center fielder, but then ran into 21 home runs a few years back. The Twins just have to rely on health this year, which is why I believe Pacoda and Fangraphs has them winning the division. The pieces are there. If they are healthy, there's a chance they're the best team in the division. But they've proven every single season they're not a healthy bunch. Byron Buxton has never put it together for an entire season and stayed healthy for the majority of it. There was one year, maybe it was 2019, he was able to do that for the most part, but he's not somebody you count on for 140 games. Sometimes you can't even count on him for 100. Royce Lewis, same thing. Unbelievable talent, can't stay healthy. Carlos Correa, at this point in his career, struggling to stay healthy a little bit. And those are the guys that drive the bus for Minnesota. If they can't stay healthy, there's not enough pieces in that lineup to help out. You can bank on Eduardo Julian. You can bank on Miranda. You can ask for more help for some of those corner outfield pieces. But Minnesota, to me, is the same group they've been now for the last 2 years. If they're healthy, they can win 90 games. If they're not healthy, they can bottom out in the way they did last year and finish in 4th place. Cleveland, on the other hand, never count out Cleveland. That's the way I view the Guardians. Last year, you would have been shocked if I said right before spring training, they're going to win 95 games. And they're going to get to the ALCS, and they're going to give the Yankees, for the most part, a run for their money. Youngest group in baseball. Rotation was not really formed that well. Banking on a lot of guys who had never done it before. Shane Bieber goes down 2 starts into the season. They had a all-league type of bullpen. I know it's not an award you get. All league means nothing in baseball, but you get what I'm hinting at here. That was the best bullpen in baseball. That was one of the best bullpens we've ever seen. Every guy that came out of the gate when it swung open was breathing fire. And it's headlined by Emmanuel Clase. But there were other guys, and Cleveland's always been this way. There were other guys that you didn't even recognize the name, and they had a sub 1.8 ERA and 12 strikeouts per 9. Great command, power stuff. If you were trailing after the end of 5 innings, the game was over. How hard is that to repeat? I believe really hard. Because even though you have this offseason, the wear and tear from a year ago might show up this year. And Cleveland subtracted from their lineup, a lineup that did struggle. They no longer have Josh Naylor, who drove in over 100 last year. They move on from Andres Jimenez, one of the best defenders in the entire sport. The reason I say never count out Cleveland is every time they make a deal like this, somebody improves on the next year. Somebody becomes the next star. Like when they traded Francisco Lindor, it felt like they were dead in the water. Clearly not the case. Clearly not the case. And I know they would long for Francisco Lindor to come back because of what he's doing in New York. But they found a way to get the most out of Andres Jimenez and Ahmed Rosario. Cleveland just does that. They've been doing that for 2 decades, it feels like. They don't need the highest payroll. They may not win the World Series, but they're always a tough out. Right now, when I look at their lineup compared to the Royals, the edge in the bullpen goes to Cleveland. The edge in the rotation goes to Kansas City. And the lineup, like I said with Detroit, it's a bit of a toss-up. You might not know until we're halfway through the season what Cleveland really looks like. All we know is that they are turned by Jose Ramirez. They are run by Jose Ramirez. Might not matter who's hitting ahead of him or behind him. You can pretty much pencil him in to hit over 300, smack over 30 home runs out of the park, and drive in anywhere from 100 to 110. I can bookmark it right now, and he'll finish top 10 in MVP voting. That's Jose Ramirez for you. Everybody else, they can piece it together, and they can win this division. I do wonder, though, if the rotation can go through another year like that and find a way to win 95 games, because that's counting on the bullpen to be one of the best bullpens of all time again. And the White Sox, we don't really need to spend too much time on. They will be better than they were last year. Low bar, right? If you win 41 games, it's not asking for much. And it's crazy to think that if they win 62 and still lose 100, it's a 21-game improvement. It's absurd. That total is absolutely absurd. But don't expect teams in the Central to go 12-1 against them in 2025. They're going to be able to get somebody multiple times. I think their lineup is a little bit more formidable. Their rotation doesn't have as many holes. Their bullpen's still not very good. They're still not a great team, but new manager at the helm, a little bit of new blood, more prospects to try out earlier on in the season. I got them winning anywhere from 60 to maybe 64 games this year, mainly because it's so hard to lose 121. There will be some improvement. Not sure they're going to have as much bad luck. The Royals are a much better team than those. So I think that the Royals and Tigers, they're very comparable. Minnesota, if they're healthy, you can make a case for the best team in the division. And then for Cleveland, never count them out. Never think they are bad just because their roster doesn't look good on paper. They've got that ability every single year to rattle off 90 to 95 wins. We'll probably have a deeper breakdown with other Locked On podcasts the closer we get to the regular season, have our division winners. We'll see how everything shakes out with the offseason. If some of these guys go to another American League Central team, but as of right now, that's what I got with a little bit of a roster breakdown. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, MJ Melendez apparently has a new stance. I'm going to see it this week. Do we believe there's anything to it? Is it that drastic where it can actually improve his numbers? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The final thing we're going to dive into here is something that I'm going to have my eyes on down surprise, even though it'll be batting practice. It's not going to be any live scrimmaging, nothing like that, but just to see what it looks like in person. And that's MJ Melendez and his new stance. For some of you out there, this segment is going to be infuriating to you because we've done one of these before. MJ Melendez has a new stance. He's changed his hand placement. It should help him at the plate. It should help him cover more of the plate. And it should result in improving the numbers a little bit. Hasn't worked out so far. And the 3 years that he's been in the big leagues, Melendez has not had that steady improvement. He has not had that consistency. We've seen the flashes, not the consistency. About a few months ago, he posted on his Instagram video, I don't have Instagram, so I was sent this video, asked what I thought about it, and it didn't do much for me at the time. Because A, it's an off-season video. It is just some live BP. He's not in uniform or anything like that, just T-shirt and shorts. And he's taking some hacks, and it did look good. It looked more controlled. It looked more comfortable. Much different to do in an actual big league game against big league pitching. But there is something to take away from this, and why I do believe going into spring training, you will see a different approach. You might see some better swings as well. Not all those games are going to be televised, but in the ones that they are televised, hopefully you get to see MJ Melendez in this new stance, because I'm not going to need to send everybody here the video on Instagram of what it looks like. It's been posted out there before. It's pretty drastic. It's not the hand placement change he had last spring training. I noted that on Twitter last year, where he was still open. His stance was still open, but his hands were more out over the plate instead of right back towards his chest. It's been a different stance every single season of his big league career. And I went back and looked at some of the highlights, some of the film from 2022, 2023, and 2024. And each of the clips that I found, they all were different. They all had different hand placement. They had different balances at the plate. In the 2022 clip, he is completely open, almost with his chest facing the pitcher, and his bat's resting on the shoulder. That's now long gone. In 2023, it was the open stance, but the bat was still close to the chest. 2024 had the open stance. The hands are out over the plate a little bit, almost Eric Hosmer-like. Now in this video we saw on Instagram, it is a completely closed stance. Maybe not completely closed, because then your body would be angled a different way, but it is pretty even. It's a very generic-looking stance. I'm trying to recall somebody that has a similar one. None are coming out the top of my head. I'm not going to spend time just going through names in my head, but there is more control. His legs are even. The hands are pretty comfortable. Not too high, not too low, just kind of resting back on his shoulder. And I do believe that allows him more plate coverage. Whereas last year, and there was this video put out there by one of the fantasy baseball guys that I want to make sure I give credit to here. It was Mike Kurland, who you can follow him on Twitter at Mike_Kurland. But he likes MJ Melendez, says he hits the ball hard, barrels the ball well, pulls the ball in the air a ton. Team hasn't added anyone to threaten his playing time. And the last part is working on his mechanics this offseason. He's got a side-by-side video of a swing in the Atlanta series to close out last year and what his swing looks like right now. The swing looks like right now, very controlled, good follow-through. Head placement's good. The load doesn't seem too wonky. And in the video he's got in Atlanta, you just have a lot going on there. You got the high leg kick, the balance, and this pitch is just almost down the middle. It was looks like a changeup right above the bottom of the zone, and it's just a flail one-handed. That's a pitch that, with this new stance, you could have the ability to crush. But to me, it's more so about the pitches up in the zone. Last year, as we recall, when MJ Melendez was pitched up in the zone, it was a major problem for him. Lots of swinging and missing, lots of pop-ups, because his stance was not a favorable stance to connect on that pitch. We saw when he was going well, it was that low pitch, whether it be low and away, it be low and inside. It was mostly low and inside, the ones he would crush. But when it was high and inside or it was high and away, you think about it, the stance is up here where the bat head is out over the plate. You've got the high leg kick, so you're moving back. You could be off balance if it's not the pitch you're anticipating. And then your bat is having to come down, up, and there were led to a lot of pop-ups. It just didn't work. That's fine. That happens in baseball. You try out a stance. It doesn't work. You go back to the drawing board. This, I will say, I know it's going to be unpopular in the comments because we have a lot of people that are not in on MJ Melendez. They don't want him to start. And this isn't a campaigning piece to start MJ Melendez and all of a sudden he's going to figure it out. But what I'm curious to see is how drastic it looks in person. Because it's one thing to have this on an Instagram video and to be back then. That's what the stance looked like. And then when you get into live games, it's completely different. For Melendez, if he does stay that way, this is the most drastic his approach has ever looked. I liken it a little bit to Ryan O'Hearn, what he talked about when he got to Baltimore. They changed up what he was doing. It helped him for the better. You have your fingers crossed that something like that can happen for MJ because it completely changes this lineup. If you've got a true thumper in the middle of the order, a stance and just a video of that stance is not going to do it for me. It's not going to do it for anybody, I would imagine, but it's something to watch. If this is what unlocks his swing, which it's more controlled, there's more balance, there's better hand placement, it's good, focus, if you will, on certain pitches, has the ability to cover all ends of the plate, that can lead to more success. With the stance that he once had, there's a lot going on. And when he was struggling, he was really struggling. Hopefully, a stance like this where you run into struggles, which naturally happen, you still have that ability to get out of it quickly. Where a 1 for 10 or 1 for 15 doesn't turn into 1 for 30 like it did last year. It might lead to more walks, better plate discipline because you feel more comfortable in that plate control, covering all of the plate. All of that combined, maybe we do see something. And the other side of this is maybe that doesn't change anything at all and reverts back to the old stance. Just wanted to point it out as something I'm watching going into spring training, which we leave for coming up on Saturday. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to have a morning episode talking about an outfielder that's still out there, gotten lots of questions about. MLB Network even picked him as a fit for the Royals. And for the right price, maybe it would be the correct pick. But we'll talk about him next in Tuesday's episode. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.